the mail-order bride never arrived. Until a rancher found her crawling to stay alive, Eli Thompson had lived on the same stretch of land for nearly 40 years. The Wyoming plains were vast and quiet, stretching farther than his eyes could see. In the distance, the mountains rose like silent sentinels, their snow-tipped peaks shimmering in the morning sun. The ranch had been in his family for generations, and Eli had poured his life into it. Every fence post, every barn beam, every row of cattle he tended was a piece of him. Yet, despite the life he had built, there was a part of him that felt incomplete. After losing his wife several years ago, the house had grown too quiet. The laughter and warmth that had once filled its rooms were replaced by the soft, echoing sounds of the wind slipping through cracks in the old wooden walls. The silence was heavy, and even the work he loved could not fill the emptiness that had settled over him. Eli was used to solitude, yes, but he had never imagined life without someone to share it with. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the mountains, Eli thought about what might bring back a sense of hope. His gaze traveled across the fields, past the horses grazing lazily, past the barn where the smell of hay still clung to the air, and landed on the empty swing hanging from the old oak tree. Memories of his wife Mary came flooding back. She had loved that swing. She had loved life in all its small, ordinary moments. "I can't do this forever," he muttered to himself, rubbing his hands over his rough palms. He had thought about it for weeks, pacing the porch at night, thinking of ways to fill the void. Finally, an idea came that seemed both bold and frightening. He would look for a mail-order bride. The idea wasn't as strange as it sounded. In those parts of the country, many men who lived far from towns and neighbors had found partners this way. A letter, a photograph, a few carefully written sentences could start a life. It wasn't a perfect system, and it required courage. But Eli was determined. He wanted someone to share his life with, someone who could laugh at the same jokes, wake up to the same sunrises, and perhaps even love this land as much as he did. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Clara Bennett was making her own quiet plans. She lived in the city, in a small apartment that overlooked a busy street. Clara had always dreamed of adventure, of stepping away from the routine of her life and discovering something new. She worked as a teacher, enjoyed books, and loved walking through the parks on weekends, but a part of her felt restless. She wanted more than what her city life offered, more than the predictable days that passed one into another. Clara had seen advertisements for mail-order arrangements before, but only now did it feel like the right time. She wanted a fresh start, a life that would challenge her, a world that stretched beyond the tall buildings and crowded streets. When she read Eli's letter, a few carefully chosen sentences that spoke of family, hard work, and quiet honesty, something clicked. She could feel the sincerity in his words. He wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't. There was no grand promise of wealth or luxury, only the honesty of a man who wanted companionship and shared life. They began exchanging letters regularly. At first, the letters were cautious. Eli asked about Clara's favorite things, her books, her mornings, what made her laugh. Clara described the city in detail, painting pictures of streets crowded with people, cafes where she sipped her coffee, and the small joys of her everyday life. With each letter, they learned about each other, little by little, building trust across the miles. Eli told Clara about his ranch. He wrote about the cattle, the horses, and the vast fields that seemed to go on forever. He shared his dreams of maintaining the land, of keeping the ranch alive for future generations, and more quietly, of finding someone to share it with. Clara listened in her letters, imagining the golden sunsets over the plains, the smell of fresh hay, and the open sky stretching endlessly above her. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Both of them waited eagerly for the day they would finally meet. Each letter felt like a step closer to that moment, a step closer to turning dreams into reality. Eli counted the days, sometimes staring at the mailbox with anticipation, hoping to see Clara's handwriting again. Clara, too, would reread Eli's letters, feeling a warmth she hadn't known she was missing. The anticipation grew heavier with each passing week. Eli prepared the ranch for her arrival, making small improvements that he had delayed over the years. He polished the porch, repaired the creaky barn doors, and even planted a few flowers near the house. It wasn't much, but he wanted her to feel welcome, to feel that the land was a place she could call home. Clara, on her side, made arrangements to leave the city. She packed her belongings carefully, folding each piece of clothing with care, making sure she had everything she would need for life on the ranch. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The journey would be long, and she didn't know what to expect, but she trusted Eli's words and the growing connection they had formed through their letters. The day finally arrived. Eli stood at the station, the crisp morning air brushing against his face. His heart beat faster than usual. He had watched this day in his mind for months, picturing Clara stepping off the train, smiling, looking as she had described herself in her letters. The train whistle blew, and passengers began to disembark. But Clara did not arrive. Eli's stomach sank. He waited, scanning every face, hoping, against hope, that he might have missed her. Hours passed. The train left, and still there was no sign of her. He asked the station master if any messages had come, but there were none. The letters that had bridged the distance between them seemed suddenly fragile, unable to hold up to the uncertainty of the real world. Back in the city, Clara's journey had not gone as planned. The path she had taken to reach the station had been longer and more difficult than she expected. She had faced delays, and a small accident had left her stranded in a remote area. Alone and hurt, she had been forced to keep moving, crawling at times simply to survive. The city, the train, the letters, all of it had seemed so certain in her mind. Now, the reality was harsh, unforgiving, and frightening. Eli returned home that evening, his heart heavy. He tried to focus on his work, but the ranch felt emptier than ever. The swing on the porch seemed even more forlorn, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. He wondered if he had misjudged, if the idea had been foolish from the start. Yet despite the disappointment, a spark of hope remained. He could not give up. He had waited this long. Perhaps Clara was still out there, and fate had a way of working things out in its own time. That night, Eli sat on the porch, staring at the stars. He thought about Clara and the life they had imagined together, even though she hadn't arrived. Even though the day had ended in uncertainty, he could feel the bond that had grown through their letters. Somewhere out there, she was thinking of him too. Somewhere out there, she was making her own way, facing challenges, and dreaming of the day they would meet. The silence of the plains was no longer empty. It was filled with possibility, with the quiet hope that the next day could bring something extraordinary. Eli did not know what would happen, but he knew that life had a way of surprising those who were willing to wait and endure. And deep down he believed that Clara Bennett, the young woman who had captured his imagination and his heart from afar, would find her way to him, no matter how difficult the path might be. The morning after the day Eli had waited in vain at the station, the ranch felt heavier, as if the land itself shared his worry. He woke before sunrise, as he always did, But this time the quiet felt different. There was a tension in the air, a question that hovered above the fields. Where was Clara? Eli tried to push the thought aside as he went about his chores. He fed the horses, checking each stall carefully. The cows needed attention, and the barn smelled of hay and earth. Normally, he would find comfort in the rhythm of his work, the routine of a life he knew so well. But today, every task felt slower, weighed down by the absence of the woman he had been waiting for. He rode out to check the fences, the wind brushing against his face. The open plains stretched endlessly in every direction, and he could see the mountains in the distance, their peaks glimmering in the sunlight. Normally, the sight of the vast land gave him peace, but now it only reminded him of the distance between him and the woman he longed to meet. Back in the city, Clara was facing a reality she had never imagined. Everybody had then no real part. Of hope and excitement, imagining the adventure of meeting Eli and starting a new life on the ranch. But the journey had been harder than she expected. A sudden storm had forced her to take shelter in a small, abandoned cabin on the outskirts of a quiet town. The roof leaked, and the floor was cold, but it was better than being exposed to the weather. She tended to a small injury she had received during her travels, a deep scrape on her leg from falling on uneven ground. Every movement reminded her of how far she still had to go. The next morning, she continued her journey. She had hoped to catch a stagecoach, but the schedule was uncertain, and the road stretched on for miles. Clara walked as long as she could, carrying her bag with all her belongings. By mid-afternoon, her energy began to fade. The sun was hot, and the plains seemed to stretch endlessly, unbroken except for the distant outline of trees. As the day went on, Clara's strength weakened. The small stream she had hoped to find had dried up, leaving her thirsty and exhausted. She knew she had to keep moving, even though her legs ached and her body begged her to stop. The letters from Eli were tucked safely in her bag, their words reminding her of the reason she had set out on this journey. She thought of his calm voice, his gentle words, and the life he had described in such detail. Those letters gave her courage when her body had none. Back at the ranch, Eli sent another letter, though he knew it might take days to reach her. He wrote about the land, about the cattle and horses, and about the chores he had completed that morning. He included small details, hoping to bring her closer through his words. He imagined her reading them, thinking of him, and finding hope in the routine of his life. Days passed with no reply. Eli began to feel the worry settle in his chest like a heavy stone. He asked neighbors if they had seen anything unusual or heard any news of travelers in the area. But no, one had. The quiet, vast land offered no answers. He began to think of the many possibilities. Had she changed her mind? Had she gotten lost? Or was something worse happening? His mind raced, imagining every scenario, and yet he refused to give in to despair. Clara's situation had grown more dangerous. She had fallen during her journey and twisted her ankle. She tried to walk, but each step sent sharp pain through her leg. She knew that stopping for too long could leave her exposed, but moving was becoming almost impossible. She crawled when she could no longer stand, dragging herself over rocks and brush. Each movement was a battle, each breath a victory. Despite the fear, Clara never gave up hope. She remembered Eli's letters, the way he had described the land, the animals, and his daily life. She imagined him waiting at the station, expecting her arrival. That thought alone gave her the strength to continue, even when it seemed impossible. She whispered his name under her breath as she crawled, as if calling on him could somehow reach across the distance and guide her to safety. At the ranch, Eli began to feel restless. The work that usually grounded him now felt like a distraction from the unknown fate of Clara. Eli. He rode farther into the fields than usual, checking fences and surveying the land as if he might somehow see a figure in the distance. Each sound made him tense, wind rustling through the trees, a distant coyote's howl. But nothing appeared. The days stretched on, and the worry in his heart grew heavier with each passing hour. Meanwhile, Clara had reached a small wooded area. The shade offered some relief from the scorching sun, but it also reminded her how isolated she was. The trees were sparse, and there were no signs of people. And she had hoped to find help, a town or at least a farm, but the land remained empty and unforgiving. Her energy was almost gone, and her thoughts became hazy with exhaustion and hunger. Yet she refused to stop completely. She pressed forward, crawling when she had to, hoping that someone, anyone, would find her before it was too late. One evening, Clara found herself near a dry riverbed. The ground was cracked, and the air smelled of dust and earth. She rested briefly, trying to regain her strength, and thought about what she would say to Eli when she finally reached him. She imagined telling him about the journey, about the hardships she had faced, and about the courage it had taken to keep going. Even in her weakened state, the thought of finally meeting him gave her a sense of purpose. Eli, back at the ranch, continued to hope. Each day he looked for signs of her arrival, footprints in the dirt, a figure on the horizon, a letter delivered unexpectedly. He knew that the journey was not easy, and that unexpected delays could happen. Still, he worried. He worried about the dangers of travel, about harsh weather, and about the possibility that she might be lost. His mind would not rest even during the quiet moments of the day. Then, one morning, a neighbor mentioned seeing a figure crawling along a distant trail near the edge of Eli's property. At first, Eli thought it was his imagination. Could it really be? He mounted his horse and rode out, heart pounding. As he approached, he could see a small, weak figure moving slowly, struggling to lift itself with every inch. The closer he got, the more he realized that this was no ordinary traveler. The figure was in distress. It was Clara. She was barely recognizable, covered in dust and scratches, her clothes torn from the journey. She had been crawling to survive, dragging herself across the land, hoping against hope that someone would find her. Her eyes were tired but full of determination, and when she saw Eli, a faint, exhausted smile crossed her face. Eli rushed to her side, helping her to her feet and supporting her as they made their way back to the ranch. He spoke softly, reassuring her, telling her that she was safe now. Clara's relief was overwhelming. Tears streamed down her face as she realized that she had finally reached the man who had been waiting for her, even when the world had tried to make the journey impossible. Back at the ranch, Eli tended to Clara's injuries, cleaning her scrapes and bruises, offering water and food. She rested on a blanket, exhausted but grateful. Their letters had been the bridge that connected them across distance and danger, and now, finally, they were together. Though the journey had been difficult and frightening, the experience had forged a bond between them. Eli admired Clara's courage and determination, and Clara admired Eli's patience and unwavering hope. The trials they had faced separately had prepared them for the life they would now build together, a life grounded in trust, perseverance, and shared dreams. The ranch, once quiet and heavy with absence, now carried a new warmth. The morning chores, the sound of horses, and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees felt different. They felt alive with possibility. Eli and Clara had faced the harshness of life and survived, and now they could begin a new chapter together. Even as Clara rested and recovered, she could not stop thinking about the journey she had endured. She knew that the plains were vast and unforgiving, but she also knew that hope could carry a person through even the hardest trials. And Eli, watching her recover, understood more than ever the value of patience, trust, and the belief that some things are worth waiting for, no matter how long it takes. The story of Clara's struggle and Eli's unwavering hope spread quietly through the nearby community. People were amazed at the strength and courage of the young woman who had crawled across the land to reach the rancher who had been waiting for her. But for Eli and Clara, the journey was not just a story to tell. It was the beginning of a life that would be shared, a life that would be built on perseverance, love, and the unexpected ways that fate can bring two people together. Clara's body ached in ways she had never felt before. Every movement brought sharp pain. Every breath felt heavy, and yet despite the exhaustion, her mind refused to give up. She had survived so far, relying on sheer determination and the hope that someone would find her. She crawled through rough ground, her hands scraped and bleeding, her clothes torn from brush and rocks. The sun burned overhead and the wind carried the scent of dust and dry grass. She remembered Eli's letters as if they were guiding lights in the wilderness. His words had been gentle, kind, and full of hope, describing a life of hard work balanced by simple joys. She thought of him sitting on the porch, waiting, imagining her arrival. That image gave her the strength to keep moving, even when her body threatened to collapse. At times, Clara had to stop and rest. She would lie in the shade of a lone tree or behind a rock, closing her eyes and listening to the wind. Each pause brought relief, but also fear. She knew that stopping too long could leave her vulnerable. She reminded herself that every small effort, every inch she managed to crawl, brought her closer to safety. She whispered Eli's name over and over, as if saying it aloud would somehow carry her to him. Meanwhile, Eli could not shake the worry that had settled over him since Clara had failed to arrive. The ranch felt emptier than ever. The animals, normally a source of comfort, seemed quieter, as if they too sensed the tension in the air. Each day he would ride the fields, checking fences, watching the horizon, and hoping to see a figure approaching. His mind imagined every possible scenario, some good, many frightening, but he refused to give in to despair. He had faith that Clara would reach him, that her courage would carry her through any danger. Back on the trail, Clara faced one of her hardest moments yet. A small river blocked her path. The water was low and muddy, but stepping in would risk further injury. She balanced carefully, testing each rock before placing her weight on it. A slip could mean falling and worsening her condition. She moved slowly, carefully, inch by inch, knowing that patience was her only ally. Hours passed. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land. Clara's energy waned, but the thought of giving up never crossed her mind. She imagined the warmth of Eli's hands helping her to the ranch, the kindness in his voice telling her she was safe. That vision became her fuel. She took a deep breath, gritted her teeth, and continued moving forward, even as the cold began to creep into her tired body. As night approached, Clara found a small patch of tall grass where she could rest for a few hours. The stars began to appear, one by one shining like tiny lanterns in the dark sky. She felt a strange sense of comfort in their presence, as if the universe itself were watching over her. The wind whispered softly through the grass, and for a moment she allowed herself to hope. She hoped that tomorrow would bring her closer to Eli, that the ranch would finally appear over the horizon. But the night was not without danger. The sounds of the wilderness were unfamiliar and often frightening. Every rustle in the grass, every distant howl made her tense. She had learned to move quietly to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. Her survival depended not only on strength, but also on caution. Each decision, each careful movement, became a matter of life or death. Eli, on the ranch, had grown increasingly anxious. Days of waiting had passed since he last imagined seeing Clara, and the worry in his heart was constant. He knew the land could be unforgiving. He had grown up respecting its power, understanding that the weather, the rough terrain, and even the isolation could challenge the strongest person. He feared that something had gone wrong, that she had been caught in some trouble. Yet he refused to give up. He held on to the hope that he had seen in her letters, the courage that had drawn him to her from the start. One morning after a restless night, Clara continued her journey. The pain in her body was sharp and relentless. Her hands were raw, her legs weak, and her stomach empty. Yet she moved forward. She had learned to focus on small victories, making it another 10 feet, reaching the shade, finding a patch of water to drink. Each step, however small, was a triumph. At one point, she encountered a steep hill. It seemed impossible to climb, but she reminded herself that giving up was not an option. She used her hands and knees, gripping rocks and roots, pulling herself upward inch by inch. Her muscles burned and sweat poured down her face, but she refused to stop. The thought of Eli waiting for her, of finally reaching the ranch, gave her the determination to keep moving. Hours later, she collapsed briefly at the top of the hill, gasping for air. She looked down and saw a valley stretching far below, the kind of open land she had only imagined from Eli's letters. For a moment, hope surged in her heart. She felt that she was closer than ever. But the journey was not yet over. She had to continue, to crawl, to struggle, to survive. Meanwhile, Eli had decided to search further. He mounted his horse and rode along a winding path that cut through the property, scanning the land with hope in his heart. He thought about what he would say when he found her, how he would help her, how he would make her feel safe. The thought of her crawling alone across the land filled him with worry, but also with resolve. He would not rest until she was safe. As Clara moved forward, night fell again. She found herself in a small clearing, tired beyond measure. The darkness was complete, but she refused to stop entirely. She whispered a prayer, asking for guidance, for strength, and for someone to find her. She felt a strange sense of comfort, as if her plea had been heard. Suddenly, a distant sound reached her ears, the faint jingle of a horse. Her heart leapt. Could it be? Could someone finally be here? She tried to call out, her voice weak and hoarse, but she managed a few soft cries. The sound grew closer. She crawled toward the noise, fueled by hope and desperation. Eli was following the sounds of movement he hadn't expected to see. As he rounded a small hill, he finally saw her, a small, fragile figure crawling through the grass. Time seemed to stop. He could hardly believe his eyes. Clara, the woman he had been waiting for, was right there, struggling but alive. His heart pounded in his chest as he urged his horse closer, careful not to startle her. When Clara saw him, she managed a faint smile, tears forming in her eyes. Relief washed over her. She had endured so much, faced so many obstacles, and yet she had finally reached him. Eli dismounted and rushed to her side, offering his hands to help her stand. She collapsed into his arms, exhausted but safe at last. Eli helped her back to the ranch, supporting her every step of the way. He spoke softly, reassuring her, telling her that she was safe and that the worst was over. Clara, still weak and trembling, felt a warmth she had not known in days. The journey had been brutal, but now, finally, she was where she was meant to be. Back at the ranch, Eli tended to her injuries, cleaning scrapes, providing food and water, and making her comfortable. The house that had once felt empty now seemed alive with possibility. The struggles of the journey had brought them closer, building a bond that was stronger than either of them had imagined. Clara rested that night, finally able to close her eyes without fear. She thought about the journey, about every challenge she had faced, and about the courage it had taken to survive. She realized that the struggles had shaped her, made her stronger, and prepared her for the life she was about to begin with Eli. Eli sat nearby, watching over her, filled with gratitude and relief. He understood more than ever the value of patience, trust, and hope. Clara's determination had proven that the human spirit could endure even the harshest conditions. And now, together, they could begin a new chapter, one built on shared strength, love, and perseverance. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, now carried the warmth of life returning. The animals moved with calm curiosity. The wind whispered through the fields, and the stars shone brightly in the night sky. Eli and Clara had faced the hardships of the wilderness and the uncertainty of separation, and yet they had found each other. Their journey was a testament to courage, hope, and the enduring power of human connection. Eli could hardly believe his eyes when he saw Clara. She was lying on the ground, weak and exhausted, her body covered in dust and scratches from the long journey. Every inch of her told a story of struggle and determination. For a moment, he simply stood there, stunned by the sight of her, unsure whether to speak or move closer. Then, with a deep breath, he rushed to her side. "Clara," he said softly, his voice trembling with relief. "You're safe now. I've got you." Clara tried to smile, but the effort made her wince. Her body ached in every place she had been hurt, but she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The fear that had haunted her for days, the fear of being alone, lost or unseen, began to fade. She could feel Eli's steady hand supporting her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the weight of hope. Eli helped her slowly to her feet, careful not to jostle her too much. Her legs were weak and she could barely stand, but she clung to him, trusting that he would guide her safely. Step by step, they began the journey back to the ranch. The distance seemed both short and impossibly long. Each movement was a careful balance between urgency and caution. As they walked, Eli spoke gently, trying to calm her fears and reassure her. "You're going to be all right now, I promise. The house is warm, there's food, and you can rest. You're safe with me." Clara nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. I'm so tired. "I didn't think I could make it." "You did," Eli said, squeezing her hand. "You're here. That's what matters. You're stronger than you know." The ranch came into view as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Eli's heart lifted at the sight. The home that had once felt empty now seemed to shine with the promise of new life. He led Clara through the gate, careful with each step, and into the house he had prepared for this moment, though he had never known it would arrive in such dramatic circumstances. Inside, Eli guided her to a blanket he had laid out near the fireplace. The warmth of the room, the smell of clean hay from the barn, and the soft crackle of fire brought a sense of comfort Clara had not felt in days. And she sank onto the blanket, finally able to rest without fear. Her body relaxed, though she was still trembling from exhaustion. Eli knelt beside her, tending to the scrapes and bruises that covered her arms and legs. He cleaned each wound carefully, using water he had boiled and cloths he had prepared. Clara winced at some of the pain, but she appreciated the gentle care. Every touch, every careful motion reminded her that she was no longer alone. "I thought I would never see anyone," Clara whispered, her voice weak. "I thought I would be out there forever."
"You're here now," Eli said softly.
"And I won't let anything happen to you. You made it. That's all that matters." Clara rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to close her eyes and let exhaustion take over. Ah! Sleep came slowly at first, but eventually it claimed her completely. Eli stayed awake, watching her carefully. He thought about the journey she had endured, the courage it must have taken, and the strength she had shown. His heart swelled with admiration and gratitude. He realized that their connection, built through letters and hope, had been tested in the harshest way possible, and it had survived. Now it was stronger than ever. The next morning, Clara awoke to the smell of breakfast cooking and the sound of Eli moving quietly around the kitchen. She felt stiff and sore, but the warmth of the room and the presence of Eli gave her comfort. He had prepared porridge and tea, knowing she needed nourishment to regain her strength. "Good morning," Eli said gently. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Clara admitted, managing a small smile. "But better." "Thanks to you," Ellie smiled back. "We'll take it slow." "No rushing, just rest and eat. Your body needs time." The following days were filled with care and recovery. Eli helped Clara with her injuries, cleaned the cuts and bruises, and encouraged her to rest as much as possible. He even tended to her clothing, mending the tears and washing away the dust and grime of her journey. Clara felt a sense of safety she had never known. Every gesture of care, every moment of patience reminded her that she had reached the right place with the right person. During this time, they shared stories. Eli spoke about the ranch, his life, and the dreams he had once held for a partner who could share them. Clara spoke of her life in the city, her hopes, her fears, and the adventure she had imagined. Their conversation was slow at first, cautious, but as the days passed, it became easier, warmer, and more intimate. Clara realized that the journey had changed her. She was no longer the same person who had left the city full of excitement and uncertainty. She had faced hardship, tested her limits, and survived. The fear she had carried was replaced by a quiet confidence, a belief in her own strength, and a deeper appreciation for the kindness and courage she found in Eli. Eli, for his part, saw her in a new light. Her determination, resilience, and ability to endure hardship had proven her character beyond any letter or description. He admired her more than ever, not only for surviving the journey, but for the way she held on to hope despite everything. The respect and care he felt for her deepened, forming a bond that neither distance nor danger could break. As Clara regained her strength, they began small walks around the ranch. At first she moved slowly, supported by Eli, taking in the fields, the horses, and the barns. Each step was a small victory, and Eli encouraged her, celebrating every milestone. The world that had once seemed vast and intimidating now felt welcoming, filled with life and promise. Neighbors began to notice her presence and spoke quietly of the incredible journey she had endured. Stories of her courage spread, and people admired both her bravery and Eli's unwavering hope. Yet for the two of them, the focus remained on recovery, on healing, and on the beginning of a shared life that had been tested in the harshest way possible. Evenings were spent by the fireplace. Eli and Clara would sit together, talking softly, sometimes in silence, simply enjoying the presence of one another. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, now seemed alive with warmth. Clara felt a sense of belonging she had never known, and Eli felt a sense of peace he had thought impossible after so many years of solitude. Slowly, the rhythm of daily life returned. Eli tended the fields, cared for the animals, and worked on the ranch, but now Clara could assist in small ways. She learned to care for the animals, help with chores, and navigate the land. Each day, her confidence grew and the bond between them strengthened. The shared work became a symbol of trust, partnership, and the beginning of a new chapter in both of their lives. One afternoon, after Clara had regained enough strength to walk without support, they stood together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. The fields stretched before them, bathed in golden light. The hardships of the past weeks felt distant, though never forgotten, replaced by a sense of hope, safety, and possibility. Eli turned to Clara and took her hand. "You made it," he said softly. "I always knew you would. And now, we can finally begin." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude and love. "We made it," she replied. "Together." The ranch, once empty and quiet, now felt like home in the truest sense. It was a place of life, hope, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Eli and Clara had faced challenges that could have broken them, yet they had survived, grown stronger, and found each other in the process. Their story, though filled with hardship, was ultimately a testament to perseverance, courage, and the power of human connection. After weeks of rest and recovery, Clara finally felt strong enough to move freely around the ranch. Her legs were steady, her body no longer trembling from exhaustion, and her spirit lifted with each passing day. She had survived unimaginable hardships, and now, for the first time, she could focus on the possibilities that lay ahead. The ranch, once daunting in its vastness, now felt like a place of belonging. The fields, the animals, and the mountains beyond were no longer obstacles. They were part of the life she would share with Eli. Eli noticed the change in her immediately. Her posture was stronger, her eyes brighter, and her smiles more frequent. He had watched over her during her recovery, providing care and encouragement, but seeing her regain her independence was a joy beyond measure. He admired her courage and determination, and he realized that the bond between them had grown far deeper than he had ever imagined. The letters, the wait, the fear, and the struggle, they had all led to this moment. Clara spent her mornings learning more about ranch life. Eli taught her how to feed the horses, check the fences, and care for the cows. Each task was a lesson, a way to become part of the land that had been Eli's life for so long. At first, she stumbled, but Eli's patience never wavered. He guided her gently, offering encouragement rather than criticism. The work became more than chores. It became a way for them to connect, to share responsibility, and to build trust. Afternoons were often spent walking through the fields together. They would talk about the past, about the letters that had brought them together, and about the future they hoped to create. Clara told Eli stories of her life in the city, about the people she had known and the adventures she had imagined before the journey. Eli shared stories of his childhood, of the ranch, and of the dreams he had for the years to come. Through these conversations, they learned not only about each other's pasts, but about the values, hopes, and dreams that would guide their shared life. The nights on the ranch were quiet and peaceful. Clara loved to sit by the fireplace, feeling the warmth and listening to the gentle crackle of the wood. Sometimes, they would sit in silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. At other times, they would talk softly about the stars, the weather, or the simple joys of ranch life. The bond between them deepened with every conversation, every shared task, and every quiet moment. The community began to notice Clara's presence on the ranch. Neighbors spoke quietly of the young woman who had endured such hardship to reach the rancher who had been waiting for her. Some were amazed, others inspired. Word of her courage and perseverance spread, and people admired both her bravery and Eli's unwavering hope. But Eli and Clara paid little attention to the stories. Their focus was on building a life together step by step, day by day. As the weeks turned into months, their life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The mornings were filled with work and the sounds of the animals. The afternoons were for learning, walking, or enjoying the beauty of the landscape. Evenings were quiet, often spent by the fireplace, planning, reflecting, or simply resting. The ranch, once empty and lonely, now thrived with life, laughter, and a sense of shared purpose. Clara began to feel a deep sense of belonging. She had entered the ranch as a stranger, uncertain and exhausted, but she now felt like a part of the land and a part of Eli's life. The hardships she had faced had taught her resilience, patience, and the value of trust. She realized that her journey, though terrifying, had prepared her for the life she was living now. Every struggle had a purpose, every challenge a lesson, and every step had led her to the man she loved and the home she had longed for. Eli, too, reflected on the journey that had brought Clara to the ranch. He remembered the long days of waiting, the fear that she might never arrive, and the relief and joy he had felt when he finally found her. He realized that their story was about more than letters, hope, or survival. It was about the power of human connection and the courage it takes to trust and wait for something worth having. Together, they began to make plans for the future. They spoke of expanding the ranch, improving the barns, and planting new fields. They imagined a life where they could share the land, the animals, and the work, building not just a home, but a legacy. Every plan was grounded in the knowledge that they had faced adversity together, survived, and emerged stronger. Clara also began to explore her creative side. She had always loved reading and writing, and now she found inspiration in the wide-open spaces of the plains. She began keeping a journal, documenting the beauty of the land, the daily life on the ranch, and the journey that had brought her to Eli. Writing became a way to process her experiences, celebrate her courage, and share her story with others someday. Eli supported her in every way. He built a small desk near the window of the house, where Clara could write while watching the sunrise over the fields. He admired her dedication and the way she expressed herself through words. The house, once filled only with his presence and work, now felt alive with creativity, laughter, and shared dreams. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Trust, respect, and affection grew naturally, formed not only from letters or hope, but from shared experience and survival. They learned to rely on each other, not only for physical support, but for emotional strength. The challenges they had faced together created a foundation stronger than any they could have imagined, built on resilience, understanding, and care. As the seasons changed, the ranch flourished. The fields grew green, the animals were healthy and strong, and the house was filled with warmth and life. The land that had once been a place of solitude for Ellie now symbolized hope, partnership, and the fulfillment of dreams. Clara and Eli worked together, planning, planting, and caring for the ranch, each day strengthening their bond and their shared vision for the future. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Ellie and Clara stood together on the porch. They held hands, watching the fields stretch out before them. The journey had been long, filled with fear and uncertainty, but now they were together, stronger and happier than they had ever imagined. "You've made this place come alive," Clara said softly, looking at the ranch and then at Eli. "It feels like home, like it was always meant to be this way." Eli smiled, squeezing her hand. "We've made it together," he replied. "All of it. The land, the work, and our life. Every step, every challenge. It led us here." They stood in silence for a moment, feeling the breeze on their faces and listening to the sounds of the animals settling for the night. The world around them was calm, yet full of life. The past hardships seemed distant now, like shadows that had taught them how to appreciate the light. The community continued to admire their story. Neighbors would occasionally stop by to check on Clara or to discuss ranch work with Eli. Some shared tales of the incredible journey she had endured to reach him. Others simply expressed admiration for the partnership they had built. But for Eli and Clara, the community's recognition was secondary. What mattered most was the life they were creating together, grounded in love, trust, and shared experience. Clara often reflected on how far she had come. From the city streets, full of uncertainty, to the vast plains of Wyoming, she had endured fear, pain, and exhaustion. She had faced challenges that would have defeated many, yet she had survived. Now, in the warmth of the ranch and the care of Eli, she felt a sense of peace and belonging she had never known. Eli, too, reflected on their journey. He thought about the years of solitude, the days of longing, and the moment he first realized he could not wait any longer for companionship. The letters he had sent, the hope he had carried, and the unwavering belief in Clara's courage had led them to this life. He realized that patience, trust, and hope had not only brought Clara to him, but had allowed them both to grow stronger through adversity. Together, they began to look forward, planning a life full of shared adventures and simple joys. They dreamed of expanding the ranch, raising healthy animals, and perhaps even welcoming children one day. Each plan was grounded in the lessons they had learned about patience, resilience, and the strength of the human spirit. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, now thrived with life, hope, and purpose. Eli and Clara had built more than a home. They had built a life together, one rooted in love, courage, and the understanding that the greatest journeys often come with the greatest rewards. Their story, filled with hardship, perseverance, and ultimate reunion, became a quiet inspiration, a reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, hope and determination can lead to extraordinary outcomes. As the stars appeared over the plains, Clara and Eli sat together on the porch, holding hands and listening to the gentle sounds of the night. They felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that they had endured the hardships of life and emerged stronger, united, and ready to face the future together. The journey had been long, challenging, and uncertain, but it had led them to each other and to a life filled with love, trust, and endless possibilities.